Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Activism and Short Filmmaking Roundtable panel. I am so glad that you could all join us for this conversation. My name is Stan Shields. I'm the Festival Programming Manager, for those who didn't hear it the 2 times I said it as you were getting that in before. Now, before we begin this discussion, I just want to take a moment to say that we at SIFF would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Duwamish, Suquamish, and Muckleshoot tribes, and that we occupy this land. Now, this acknowledgement does not take the place of authentic relationships with indigenous communities, but it does serve as a first step in honoring the land we occupy and resisting the erasure of indigenous past, present, and future. Thank you. Now, we're about to get started here, but if you have any questions for the filmmakers, just want to point out that you should use the Q&A feature you'll see at the bottom toward the right of your Zoom. When you want to use that and drop those questions in there. If you want to chat amongst yourselves, please use the chat. That'll be more for kind of general conversation. There is someone over looking at chat, but it might be hard for them to get everything over to people depending on how many questions there are. So please take a moment to use the Q&A for any kind of questions for the panel during this conversation. All right, so I am so pleased to introduce these guests for today. First off, I want to start off from ADELINE the Great. We have director Jessica Mendez Siqueiros. We have Jasmine Johnson, the writer. From the episodic series The Gaze, we have writer-creator Larry Powell, and the director of the episode that we are showing in the festival, Mahogany Diana Ross, Satya Bhabha. And from HALPATE, we have the director Adam Piron. And from Where Should We Go, we have director Shay O'Grady and the producer Dru Holley. So I would love to start off, and maybe I will do this in the order. We'll do it in alphabetical order of the name of your project. If you could each give us a little short description for those who may not have seen all of the works, a short description of your own individual short or episodic work that we're playing in the festival, and a little bit of the backstory on the origins or inspirations or circumstances that led you to create it. So that will mean, let's start off with ADELINE, great. And so maybe Jessica and Jasmine, if you could tell us a little bit.
Yeah, I can do the description and then I'll let Jasmine do the origins. ADELINE the Great is about a young activist who is completely othered at her school, at her boarding school. And she is accused of some like nefarious actions and has to confront her own belief systems about whether or not she needs friends in order to make change.
In the origin, I came up with ADELINE when I started writing the types of stories that I needed to see when I was like a fat little Black girl growing up in a very white world. And so I wanted to create a character who not only didn't want to conform, but wanted to tell everyone that they were actually wrong. So it's kind of how ADELINE, the character, came about and how the script came together.
Thank you. Next up alphabetically would be The Gaze. So that would be Larry Powell and Satya Bhabha.
Satya.
You take it away.
Okay, I will. I wrote this play called The Gaze, no homo, and then a year later, during the 2020 craziness we all found ourselves in, I made it into a new media series. And so it's about an openly Black queer actor at a very white, problematic theater festival. And so there's a play within the play, like the play that they are working on at the festival. And in episode 4, the playwright, the Black queer playwright, is in the process of naming the play with the beautiful interim artistic director that is Miranda Cryer and his mentor. Yeah, that's it. They find the name in the episode.
Okay. Next up, Adam, what did we talk a little bit about HALPATE?
Yeah, HALPATE kind of came around as like an idea with me and my co-director and collaborator, Adam Khalil. I had some family and friend connections with the Seminole tribe of Florida. And I know Adam we'd sort of been connected through that as well too. And we're both indigenous as well, but from different tribes. And we were really interested in kind of alligator wrestling, how it was a practice that came out from that tribe as a result of colonialism, and how that tribe really sort of that tribe was able to use it to essentially their own exploitation and kind of like flip it on its head in a lot of ways for their own empowerment and their own sort of journey to their own sort of state of control. So.
All right, and where should we go with Shay and Dru?
Dru, you want to take it, and then I can talk about the description. However, is Dru still here?
Looks like, oh, there he is.
I'm not in a position to speak. Could you take it, please?
Cool. So the film is an indictment of the financial, physical, and emotional destruction of the prominent Black community here in Portland, Oregon. And the film is really an attempt to talk about that and about all of the implications, how it started, why it started, and where it ended up.
So can you tell us, each of you, a little bit about what you wanted the viewers to take away? Because all of these shorts are, whether they're narratives or documentaries, they're all engaging and well crafted, but they definitely have an aspect of that narrative that is more than about pure entertainment. There's definitely a message that people are trying to get across. There's definitely information that's trying to be conveyed. And I want to know a little bit about what you wanted the viewers to take away from these films after they saw them. Whoever wants to go first, I guess we could start with whoever's nodded the most. I think Adam's nodded the most recently, so I'll choose you.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think like one of the things, there are like a couple things, like we were really interested in kind of the story and just sort of the really unique history of the Seminole people of Florida. They're the only tribe in the U.S. that's never signed a peace treaty with the U.S. government. So they've always kind of been known as like the unconquered. They're also the first tribe to get into Indian gaming as well too, which was also sort of a later stepping stone after alligator wrestling. But I think it was really meant to sort of like celebrate, Indigenous survivance, and also kind of looking at in its own sort of weird way how I think to a certain extent the Indigenous experience within what's now known as the US is very much kind of like this weird Twilight Zone kind of episode that's just been going on for hundreds of years. And I think the alligator wrestling is like a real sort of, it's a real, I think kind of something that's a bit indicative, but also kind of like a metaphor for a lot of things where, it went from hunting them because they had like nothing else to eat when they were living in the swamps to them sort of doing these shows for tourists, and then essentially sort of more or less kind of taking over the entire tourism industry in Florida, to having gaming. So essentially having their own sort of like of means of their own control, like both financial and cultural. And then now where they own the entire like Hard Rock company and kind of like that. So I mean, it's a really interesting. I think just for that, it was like such a I don't want to say like bizarre story, but it's something that is like such a unique kind of thing where I think most people just aren't used to really seeing stories of Indigenous people kind of like using the circumstances that they've been put into and like using it to their own advantage. So.
Okay, how about Larry? Larry and Satya?
I think you were going to say something.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that one of the really for me, like working on this and working with Larry's writing was, I think that one of the large takeaways for me about this piece, and this piece as a whole, is about language and about the power and the effect and the specificity and the intentions in language, and how the words that we say and that we speak have concrete, physical, emotional resonance, and how we speak them. Because what was kind of wonderful is it's a piece about a play, and nobody was doing any plays. We couldn't do a play. Like, we couldn't be in a room together. We couldn't create that in that same way, that kind of present tactile moment. And so, that all of the amazing directors on this project played with what we could do with our actors shooting things by themselves in their homes. And, so there's a lot of visual engagement, and I feel very, very proud of everybody for the work that they've done. And the editors also really brought a real visual vocabulary and language. But, at the initial jump off point, it was the word on the page. And so the text and the power of the language really sings through. And I think all of the moments, or so many of the moments in this series, it's like a word will come in and boom, everything changes, you know? And you really feel how powerful and important language can be.
Wow, that I mean, and meeting with Adam and what you're talking about with your work, the first season or the first play, when it's a stage play in this series of plays or series of seasons, it's called No Homo, which is a very actually problematic term that I'm not really here for, you know, that I hate to hear when people say it around me, but a term in which in this series that we reclaim and actually queerify and turn on its head in ways that may not be obvious to people who aren't of the community out of which we're speaking it from, but it's definitely there. And for me, I think it's important talking about language. You know, I'm a kind of person, I don't like to be told what to do by someone who loves to tell people what to do. If I feel like you're getting off on telling people what to do, I really don't like to be told what to do from you. And so I think that actually lives in our culture and society in a way in which we don't really deal with or talk about, who do we have to get off our back in order to feel free enough to create and to just order food at a restaurant. You know what I mean? It's just, I'm always in that space of negotiation with myself and unpacking that.
Next up, I'd love to do a little bit from ADELINE the Great, from Jessica and Jasmine.
Jasmine, do you want to start, and then I can piggyback off of what you think? Can you remind us of the question?
Please.
I was asking you to tell us a little bit about what you wanted the viewers to take away from the film at the end of it, because it's, on your case, it's entertainment on one level, but it also has a very specific message it's trying to get across. And I wanted to know how you wanted that to actually enter the world in the terms of how the viewers walked away from the film.
I know when I was writing it, I wanted to be able to kind of, if you hide a kid's vegetables in something yummy, just so they will, so they'll get their nutrients. I always want to sort of have some humor to hide, not necessarily hide, but to help, get across the more important messages, but in a lighter way, because at the end of the day, it is about children. And I know how people like to adultify little, especially minority girls. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be Adeline's a child. She's a little girl. And though she is woke and she has a lot of big ideas and a lot of passion, she still, she wanted to make friends. She wanted to belong, as lots of, 12-year-old girls do. And so that was something important that I wanted to take away, that no matter how strong and how powerful she is, she's a child and she's learning and she's growing. And I wanted, that was something that was very important to me for the takeaway.
And that was what was so great with the collaboration with Jasmine, is that you could tell right away that there was such a playfulness in this script, and figuring out the balance of that. And when you kind of punch people in the face with okay, now you've been laughing, but this is actually a child and this is actually very real. And I think there's something so lovely about telling, especially really playful and comedic, but very poignant stories through the eyes of children, is you can totally slip it in and kind of backhand people that are doing exactly what you're trying to point out is the problem.
All right, Shay.
So this project was really about Black people in Portland getting the opportunity, or Black people who live in this community telling the story about what happened to Albina, and telling it from a very real and authentic place, because a lot of stories have been done on Albina, but they've always been done through a white gaze. But if you have a Black director, Black producer, which is Dru and I, telling this story, that was the first thing that we settled on, is that we wanted the people who've lived here, grown up here, understand the community, to then add voice to the stories about what actually happened and the destruction that happened in the community. So it's really important for us to source the people that you saw in the film are all Portland. They may not necessarily have been born here, but they understand, they've been here through the destruction. They've either been researchers, people, activists themselves, and then people who were born and bred in Portland to talk about what happened in Albina. So for us, and then coming from a predominantly Black team, you know, as well as our editor too, who is also Black, it's like, that was really cool for us as a way of saying, we're going to tell the story and then reclaim it as best as we can, because it can't completely, you can't right wrongs through film, but you can expose those wrongs and then say what you're going to do now. And so that's what we really tried to do.
And just while we're on this topic, one of the original inspirations I had for the idea for this roundtable was actually from your film, Shay, Where Should We Go? Because it's bookended by this question that's asked at the beginning and near the end, which is, do you think Black people are safe in this country?
Yeah.
And then near the end of it, Professor Cleo Davis gives this statement where he says, wherever you find Black love, you're safe. So maybe we should start working on spaces of Black love and joy and prosperity as opposed to just safe spaces.
Yeah, and that was really key for us, because, and that's another thing that is that when you have a space that, excuse me, that was created by, for, and by Black people, and then this destruction, there's also what we tried to expose in the film was that there's the psychological, the physical, but really and truly you're impacting the generations that have come afterwards. And that is also there too as well, because we're asking those questions, and Dru and I really tried to show that within it, that there is, and then and the people that we talk to, if you listen, you hear that there's pain there, and there's that the racial trauma that is present in the community still that hasn't been adequately addressed, and that we're trying to address. The activists in Portland, the Black activists and activists of color are actively asking for those things. The redress, I guess, is what they're asking for. But in my opinion, is really, let's talk about the wrong. Let's talk about what happened, because that's and honestly and authentically, because that's the way that we're going to move forward. And so it is coming from that space, but you can hear the pain in almost every single one of their voices. I mean, yeah, Cleo lost and his family lost millions of dollars, but it isn't about the dollars, it's about the impact of what happened to his family that has carried on for the generations, you know? So I'm glad that that came from that. That's what I really want the audience to take away, is that this didn't end in the 60s, 70s, 80s. This continues now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it seems to me that the creation of those spaces, the community you're building right now, Shay, with these people to try and Albina to try and make this is also important, because right now we're talking about safe spaces as a place where, as a place we want to create, but safe spaces are kind of, seems to me, the minimum that we're looking for. We're looking for places where we can have that idea where we can thrive. All of these communities, so we're looking for places where we can thrive, we can be autonomous and be self-realized. And sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that that's what filmmakers, all of us on the panel, are trying to do, is really at some point rip away the curtain, rip away that gaze that has been projected upon our stories and what we want to accomplish in our lives, and the pain and I mean, even with Jasmine's story, right? It's that story is a story of that she wanted to tell because of the racial trauma that she would have suffered. And then all of these are based on trauma, but when it's a process of reclaiming. In the process of reclaiming, I don't necessarily know if we can reorient, but it's powerful to reclaim your story and then go, boom, take that. Do you get what I'm saying? So I get that that's, to me, that's really crucial. Any activist should be striving to reclaim what was taken, but not to repackage, but to redo.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an aspect of what everyone here is trying to work toward. And I think it's also, they're trying to build communities, like you're trying to build a community, I think, in a way that Adam has been building a community in his work. Larry is building a community with Satya and the team from Mother's Milk and the Gays. And all of you are doing that. So I'd love to find out a little bit right now about how you guys are kind of developing those communities. So let me think of what I want to start with. So for example, Adam, you're one of the co-founders of the film collective Cousin. Now, that's done with your co-director, Adam Khalil, and Sky Halpinka, and
Alex Lazarovich. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that this film was also kind of like a work that was sort of around the same time. Like it was sort of a genesis, and it was also something that we had kind of worked on. Like Alex is actually one of the producers on this, but yeah, it was interesting. Even like I think this work, I mean, I think even as like being with co-directors and stuff, it's, I mean, it was definitely a challenge, I think. And like, I think there were definitely things I very sort of self-admittedly messed up on. And I know like the same kind of the other way around. And I think we were able to come to a place with the film, I think, where we were both like pretty happy with it. And I think it was also kind of, I think too, that one of the other big challenges is like with us, like, I mean, we're you know, we're all Indigenous filmmakers in the collective, and even like with this project as well too, but also we're working in another community that's neither of our communities. I mean, they are Indigenous, but that doesn't mean you just have like a license to go in there and like tell your own version of that story. And so it was really sort of being conscious of that. And I think really sort of weighing like a lot of our initial instincts of how, you know, kind of like we're given a certain level of access because of, I guess you could say I mean, I don't really consider myself an authority on anything, but like, I think just being Indigenous people with a camera, that lends a certain sense of authority in terms of like what you're able to tell, or like even some level of access you can get in terms of some subjects. But I think, you know, I think there was a lot of sort of questioning of even just that, of like, what does that mean? Like how much of the film can actually be something that's our own point of view versus kind of the stories of that community in particular. And I think that was a real sort of balance too, because there were things where working with that community in particular, like, you know, we had to show them rough cuts, we had to show them all the stuff we had captured. And there's like a certain level of like cultural knowledge that they are not willing to share on camera. And which is totally fine. I mean, there's a whole, obviously, like history around ethnography and anthropology around really abusing those communities and that sort of those materials as well too. And like just a total lack of consent, or twisting a lot of the representations and stuff. So it was interesting. Like, I mean, I think, yeah, looking back, it was definitely like, it was not an easy process overall. I think we ended up with something where everybody, for the most part, was pretty happy with it. But yeah, I think even in terms of just like, for me, it was a real sort of lesson, even in terms of like, this was the first thing I've ever co-directed with someone. And I really kind of, in the end, you know, learned a lot of lessons about myself, about just kind of checking my own ego, checking where, you know, in terms of like, what does it mean to actually be a collaborator in a true sense? So it was a real sort of like journey for me in that sense, but even just from the community level too. Again, when you're working with another community that's not your own, even though they may be like share a certain experience with you, and, you know, again, to fall under the umbrella of like Indigenous, but that means a lot of different things, especially within this country. You know, I think, again, really sort of navigating a lot of how to make this film in the right way, culturally, even in terms of just like having to go before the tribal council to get permission to shoot some of this stuff, having to work with all of the different entities within the tribe that handle all of their own like media and representation things and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a real process. It's like, yeah, it's sort of like a community working with another community to make kind of a joint community effort to a certain extent. But I think it's important. I mean, especially too, just, I mean, you know, I mean, we all know the history of, or at least a history, I guess I should say, of Indigenous people within the history of the moving image, and like the real harm that's caused. A lot of stuff that's irreparable at this point, but, you know, I think kind of being, even sort of checking ourselves, I think too, of like, what are we like, what are our own blind spots as Indigenous artists and filmmakers in terms of this type of work, and how do we do something it may not be the exact same thing that's happened in the past, but like, you know, we don't want to cause a certain level of harm or something that puts it out there that just sort of adds to, you know, the moving images like legacy of like pain and misrepresentation towards other Indigenous communities.
I'd love to follow up on two of those words that you were describing that I think takes us over to Larry and Satya, which is an idea about collaboration and community, and about how you kind of organically build collaboration with by creating perhaps a hybrid community that may not be of each individual section, but might be a meeting of the minds at a third place that you can share. And it seems to me that's a lot of, Larry, it seems to me a lot of what you've been doing with the gays kind of as an extension of how you started off with Mother's Milk.
Yeah, that is This play was a finalist for a theater festival called the O'Neill National Play Conference, and it was a finalist in 2020. Was not chosen to be one of the digital options that have this digital workshop that they were having, and I was sort of like not. It was not, that wasn't enough for me, because I knew that I had a play, I had a work that was literally directly speaking to this moment that everyone felt incensed or the permission to speak up about, but that I was already dealing with. And so I was like, I'm going to reach out to the people not above me, right? This fancy festival, and which I'm still a finalist, because they did a 2-year finalist thing. I'm still a finalist. I may be able to go this year, but I'm not going to look up. I'm going to look to my right and to my left, right? I'm a look on the side like horses, and see who's on the side of me and lean on my people who are there. Who are my people who are there? My people who are there are the people who are understanding, oh, it's my ancestors' gaze. It's an ancestral gaze that I am wishing and trying to create under. And for me, I'm trying to understand, how I can cry and how I can speak and how I can scream and how I can sing in ways in which the people before me, because of the other situations, they weren't able to, because they were busy doing too many other things, trying to get through to cry, to sing, to dance, or they were crying and singing and dancing as a means to get free. And so now I'm here, and as a means to get free, what I'm going to do is reach to people who want to make things in a moment where everyone is saying, I don't know what to do. And I'm not judging those people, but it's a lot of people who are like, I don't know what to do. I'm freezing, and there's power in freezing too and slowing down. But in this moment of pivoting, I had to understand the people who were about that pivot life. That word was a little overused in that era, right? But it's about the people who were like, nah, this is the moment where I stand up as an artist, and I will take my activism and I will merge it with my art, make it artivism, and bring it to the people. And then so all of a sudden we were releasing these episodes in August. We made it in June. We were working on it in July. And then in August of 2020, we released it out into the world week by week, every Thursday. And I also decided to move to Louisville and be on the front lines for, justice for Breonna Taylor, and to work with the grassroots organizations there, and Unto Freedom, and walking side to side with Tamika Mallory and Linda Sarsour and all these people, and people who you don't even know names of, who are doing incredible work. And it was amazing, because on August 25th, we were editing one of the final episodes, and I'm giving notes to Joey Scoma, our editor, from the jail cell, from our direct action. But that's because that was so important to me, right? This food that Jasmine's speaking of, right? Where I have hidden these nutrients in, and where I am directly talking about what Shay's talking about, this gaze, and decentralizing the white gaze in the work. And the episode that you guys are featuring, you see a Black playwright doing exactly what is the problem. He's having to actually explain to this white woman what no homo means. He wouldn't even have to explain it to another person. And it's that explanation process that is detrimental to the Black artist, or the artist who is of a specific culture and the other person isn't, who has the money, who has the institution, who has the power. And so I just leaned on people who were also dealing with that and could really speak from that, not just from an intellectual point of view, but from an ontological point of view, from an experiential point of view, who were going through it. And everybody on our team were artivists, including Satya, who I will let speak.
No, thank you, Larry. And that's very true. The space was created. And the moment that the space, we made this, it was June, right? So it was June of 2020. It was such a time of trauma for everybody in so many ways. And I have to say that, you ask about the community and the collective, Stan, and this micro, us gathering on this computer community meant so much to me on a personal level, just for me in terms of my healing and in terms of where I was at and what I was going through. I remember coming out, we took a break from shooting, and I remember coming out and talking to my husband and just being like, I just feel alive. I feel like I'm in a room with people. I feel like I'm engaging in a way that it was so hard to do at that time, And I think that it just sharpened the work for all of us. Like we felt the fight, we felt the duty to be there, because we were also, it was weird and challenging. I mean, actors were setting up their own cameras and the thing, and the iPad, and we had actors of all different ages and all different technological experience, and it was stressful for them and for us. I mean, it's stressful for everyone, and on a schedule, as we all are, as we all always are, right? And so, but I think that the moment that it hit at, which was such a moment, you know, in our culture, it really was undeniable and instantly clear to everyone involved that this was more than just like making a show, more than putting on a play. It was an act of activism. It was an act of community building, and really showing up for the work, like the true work, you know, like showing up for yourself and for what we had all been talking about that month. And, you know, at that time, it just really grounded us, you know, and so much of that is really thanks to Larry and the amazing producers of this piece who like pulled it together at that time and sent things all over the country to get people to, you know, shoot. And it was really an amazing feeling of collective activism. And now to have you program us and, you know, the work be able to continue to create community. I mean, that's where our work, you know, it's funny, oftentimes you like shoot something, you edit it, and it kind of feels like the community gets smaller, and suddenly it's like you with maybe an editor in a room, and then it's like done. And then there's the step though of sharing it, and then it starts to grow and the community gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And, you know, it's platforms like yourself that give us that opportunity. So, you know, so much gratitude to you for having us, because this is how these ideas live and grow.
Really quick. I just, one quick question. I just want to say that we were shooting when all of the rioting and the protests were taking place here in Portland. And one of the things I want to make clear is that by honing in on our community and the albina, with all that is taking place or has taken place in Portland, the wider community is very much aware of what's taking place. So I think that our films, regardless of how we started, it has that ability to bring the wider community right to the table in a way that just talking at or watching the news or engaging with social media and tweeting. Films have an opportunity to literally grab them and bring them right there. And that's what I think was also key. That I think that our communities, yes, we may start small, but we end up with a lot bigger ones when these types of films are made and given an opportunity to see the light of day. That's also what I just want to piggyback on that. That's
what I was going to say too, Shay, because at the end,
great minds, my friend, great minds.
Everybody on here, you know, we have done vulnerable work, which means we have taken risks and we have risked emotional exposure. Like, you know what I mean? You know, even it may not sound intense, but what you're talking about, Jasmine and Jessica, that is like so close to my heart. You know what I mean? As you know, you have no idea. And so I'm like, these are conversations, and especially talking about them outside of the white gaze. It's so risky, but it's necessary. And so when I was at the end of it, I found myself in DC for the March on Washington, and we had aired the final episode 12. And I literally did our last little fire talk that we would have after each episode. And I walked out into the streets of DC, and I walked right into literally a march for my trans sisters and brothers. And I literally felt like, hell, I have done something. Like I was like, I have something to contribute. Right, to bring the wider conversation to me, like exactly what you just said, Shay. I think that what we have done is not just about our products; it's about the experience. It lives in our DNA forever now. So, congratulations to everyone on this Zoom. You know,
and I will be transparent that part of the reason why I arranged this to be the panel was I wanted all of you, because I thought all of you could talk to each other in ways that perhaps you wouldn't have an opportunity to, because you wouldn't cross each other's paths otherwise. I do want to take a moment to follow up what you've been talking about those ideas of those collaborators joining together and creating their own kind of system of how they work. And to talk a little bit with Jessica. Jessica, because I know we showed your first short film, Pozole, a few years ago, I think 2019. And you were very intentional about how you arranged that cast and crew you put together. There were a lot of things you were kind of reacting to at the time in Hollywood that you wanted to kind of be very clear about the intentions of how you were giving opportunity to people and using them to kind of allowing them to bring their best to the table, and they weren't getting as many opportunities. Could you say maybe a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because I am, I identify so much as a writer director and have such a specific goal within my own community, which is the Mexican American Southwest and inherently indigenous community. And so this particular film was so interesting because that sense of collaboration and community became with Jasmine. And I still feel such a like, how do I nurture this story? I think this particular collaboration made me, kind of have to listen in such a different way, because that process of listening was like, okay, I know this community. That was the like Southwest community that I grew up in. That was like listening to people who that process was making people feel listened to. And this process was like actually having to listen. And I feel like I continuously have to check myself as I talk about this film, because this is Jasmine's story, and supporting somebody else's community is a completely different responsibility that you take on, and it can't be taken on lightly. And I feel so much, Adam, what you were saying, that like we just as an industry are so put into like, especially as a like woman who walks through the world as like a white woman with a very complex history, it's like we are put into this weird bubble as an industry of like people of color and told that like we have this generalized community that is completely bullshit. And so the responsibility then of
absolute nonsense. Yeah, because I agree with you. Yeah, because we all, even as people of color, have totally my experience as a Black woman is totally different from your experiences walking through the world, right? So yeah.
And the experience culturally as somebody who literally may not know what country they're from, and somebody and like and the just vast dichotomy of people's experiences, like anybody who walks through the world. And like, so for me, the continuation of the process from Pozole and into this process is literally just continuously checking myself, like, how do I listen? How do I, like, not even my own people are a monolith. Like the person in the chat just said, like, there is literally no monolith. There's just listening. And that's our job. And like, my thing is, how can I do that with like, no matter who I'm listening to, how can I share their joy? Because that to me is like the most revolutionary thing that we can do, is like, how can I share somebody else's joy? Because like, more than likely when we're looking at something from an outside gaze, we're trying to share someone's sorrow. And like, I just think that is the thing that like that Hollywood has messed up for so long, is that gaze equals sorrow. And like that we just can't do anymore. So like, how can we build communities through joy is my,
That interestingly takes us on one level back to that original quote I was kind of talking about, which was my original inspiration for thinking about getting you together, which was the idea of like, where do you create those spaces of Black joy, Latino joy, Indigenous joy? Yeah, where do you find these places? How do you create them? And I think that's the kind of the mission. And sometimes I think that the artists are the forerunners of that mission, And I think that that's kind of the reason why I think these people in this Zoom are all kind of finding this common ground. And I just really want to appreciate that. And I also want to ask a little bit about how you want to take this to the next level, each of you. These projects are all incredibly well received in terms of, we love them at least. And I think they're very well accomplished, and we want to see more from all of you. But what I want to know now is, how do you build the next thing? How do you take these things now, and how do you step into the next level? To solidify those areas for yourselves. I know quietly that some of you are working on other things because I did some research, but I don't want to speak for you, but I want to know what you think, if not for you in general, what do we need to be thinking about for the next level? And that's an open question. I don't have a person I'm thinking, so.
Yeah, I think like for me, I think also kind of like piggybacking sort of off of the last point, and I mean, I just speak for myself here with this. It's like I'd say like I guess for myself, I'm not so much concerned with like kind of the question of joy. Like I definitely think that there should be some of that in there, in more in the world. I think I'm more curious about looking at things that aren't traumatic or re-traumatizing in a lot of ways. Like I think I think that's just like myself too. That's just kind of my own personality of how I think of things. But I think one of the things I guess I really, which I've started to find is a little bit more of like my thing, is looking at film as more of a tool, specifically when it comes to Indigenous stories, I guess around more kind of untold, but more in the sense of it being like I'm this one thing it's been gestating for about a year, that's like kind of starting to pick up, is like really kind of looking at just Indigenous people just kind of as just boring regular people, I guess, if that makes sense. Like I kind of just want to see, like, I mean, I'm not saying this is what the next project is, but it's like I just kind of want to see a movie where it's just, you know, some Indigenous people just chilling out on the couch for the day while talking about whatever. It's like, and I'm okay with that. They don't need to be like talking about who they are, you know, like it's just can be like how, you know, I mean, I'll let people like pull from that what they want in terms of like what that film could be. But, you know, I mean, I think it's, I'm also just interested in like just seeing stories of people just sort of navigating like trivial, like seemingly trivial things in their own life, like specifically when it comes to Indigenous people, because I think so much of like just the stories that are out there about Indigenous people have always been like the most like high stakes sort of life and death type of stories. And it's like, I don't know, I think it, for me, I think there's time for, it's time for, you know, just seeing a story where it's just somebody just, you know, their big thing is they got to figure out what they got to like make for dinner for it when they get home or something like that, or you know, like, you know, them just talking about like a movie that they like or something. And I think, I don't know, that may sound very like bland and stuff, but I mean, for myself, it's more just a thing of it being like, I guess I'm interested in it because it seems like something that's so like out of the norm, even though it is something that's the norm. And I think it's really kind of about, for myself, putting something out there where, we've talked about this kind of in Cousin to a certain extent, more kind of around that work where it's a bit more experimental, but like the idea that like kind of creating these things that didn't really exist when I was a kid, and kind of like always looking for stuff like this, but then like kind of getting to a certain point and realizing that like, oh, I can just do this. And, you know, hopefully that'll be a reality for some younger Indigenous person coming up or something. And they can just be like, you know, for them, it's like for me, it's like, you know, when you watch Heat and then like Wes Studi pops up in there and he's just a cop. Like it never make any mention about him being Native. He's just like a dude with a shotgun. And it's like, it's just one of those things where it's like, you know, I mean, it's just, that was like something that was like so out of the norm to see for me. And it wasn't like inspirational. It just was like, I kept questioning myself, like, why is this such an odd thing for myself to see when it would be like, you know, my uncle or something just like popping up in like an office or something like that, you know? So yeah, so I don't know, that's my rambling kind of thing of it just being like, I just want to do stuff where it just, for lack of a better term, seems normal, and that I'm not always sort of re-traumatizing an Indigenous audience by putting life and death stakes in terms of every single thing that they have to engage with an image of themselves on screen. So
yes. I think the interesting thing about that is I think that's overlaps a bit with something that I just happen to know. So I was digging around in the other things that Larry wrote, and I noticed that you had written a play recently about, I can't remember the exact title, but reclaiming my black ass imagination, something like that.
Reclamation of my black ass imagination. Because after I decentralized the white gaze in my work and in my life, I had to like, I deal with like what I had actually, honestly, embarrassingly, shamefully, all those things, went through all those emotions, like left behind. And so you know, dealing with, you know, how I hold this imagination that has never really left me, you know, how do I hold it anew, you know? And for me, it speaks to, like, dang, my life is enough. Wow, like my life is enough of material to to explore the miraculous nature of the marginalized mundane. You know, that is what I'm interested in as well, Adam. You know, I like high drama because it's fun to me. That shit's fun as hell to me. But I love it and how it lives inside of the Black mundane. And I think that's often, we have to be prepared though for how that can be misinterpreted or misunderstood. You know, it's not our business, but it will be misunderstood with people with power, probably, or if they think they have power to criticize your work, or if they're not of your experience, it will look like nothing's happening to them. But the fact that I'm finding joy in the midst of all of this that y'all are putting on me is a miracle. And it's a miracle for me to step outside and walk down the street and not break down. It's a miracle. And so I love exploring that. And I have enough life already to have a million stories. And that has been such a revelation for me because I don't have to, I feel like what Toni Morrison said, you know, the world is mine now that I've gotten that guy off my back.
Yeah, I think also, I don't mean to hog it, but it just totally reminded me of this like exchange I had this week actually with an uncle back in Oklahoma. And, you know, I come from a bit more of a, I guess by indigenous standards, a much more kind of privileged upbringing and stuff like that, which I think, you know, just to a regular non-indigenous community, it would be like relatively middle class and kind of boring, I guess. But like I had this uncle who comes from, you know, kind of the opposite of that. And, you know, he had reached out to me about a film that I won't name by another indigenous filmmaker. And it kind of deals a lot with like trauma and things like that. And he was saying, you know, like, this is like what it means to be Native, like it, you know, you have to suffer and stuff like that. But it's also, you know, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, that's the expectation of like, because those are the only images out there that I think people can latch onto, similar to what Larry was saying, where, you know, where the idea of just doing the mundane seems like such a luxury or something like that, that it's just, I don't know, for me, I'm just like, I don't know, like, let's just put it out there and we can let our own communities kind of figure out how they want to engage with it, if that makes sense. And I think just even having that option again, too, of like, you know, making it be such a sort of, not an obligation, but I think you could say sort of such a burden for our own communities to deal with their own images on screen, and like having that to be some sort of an authoritative type experience of what they think themselves should be, I think is, you know, I don't know, I'd like to challenge that a bit more. So
I guess I might be a little bit different because I want to challenge these topics because they're really challenged from Black creators in the way that I want to do it, right? I readily accept, I'm the daughter of Black revolutionaries. I know what my legacy is. But the thing is that when I'm writing or when I'm directing, I want to be able to show exactly how someone like me, who's had the upbringing, who's been literally raised from the ground up to be a Black radical, to be a Black revolutionary, to then say, okay, now here is the story, and here is it through my eyes. Here is how race, class, gender, which are the topics that I handle in all of my work. This is how a Black woman, a Black queer woman handles these issues. And again, that's totally different. Like, I will handle pain, I can handle joy, I can handle anger, I can handle fear. I don't necessarily think that you, by honing in on particular topics, that we're somehow not being pigeonholed. I think that we've not had those opportunities, and now that we have them, we should take them because we haven't had them in the past. And so I want to talk about those things through my gaze, through the Black woman queer gaze, and which has not been talked about before. Well, has been, but again, very, very, it's usually male, or it's usually people who have access to power. I'm working class. So the thing is, that's something that's most of the people in film are not working working class. So that's the thing. Where are those stories for the working class Black queer people out there? I want to tell of your pain. That's not the only story I'm going to tell, or that's not going to be my focus, but that's going to be something that I'm going to do. So I think that what it is that we have to be able to say, okay, you know what? This is a story that I can tell, but this is one that I really want to tell. I'm going to work actively to tell it so that we can tell multitudes of stories that handle this, rather than people coming into our communities and exploiting Black pain, Indigenous pain, female people who identify as feminine or female pain. Like, we can say, okay, you know what? You're not going to exploit it. If anybody should fucking exploit it, it should be us, you know? So that's the way that I think that it has to be framed, because these stories are important. And if we say we don't want to talk about it, imagine who will.
Yeah, and also just to echo off of that too, it's not meant to, none of that point was meant to talk about like erasing or not addressing any of that. I think it's more just offering a variety of stories, I think, or at least just showing different options as well. So yeah, definitely not interested in not telling or addressing that stuff, more just kind of, again, just putting it out there that, you know, there's a plethora of stories to tell all of our own experiences.
So I mean, I think that really an aspect of what's being discussed here is that everyone here is talking about how they reclaim their own voice, how they center their own voice, because when they do that, they allow, by becoming individuals, and having individual voices, you take away that idea that there is a monolithic voice of any of these communities, right? I think is that the monolith has been created by other people, not by the people in those communities. They may have to play along with it, but it came from before them, and they are really trying to navigate it to the best of their abilities. I think I really want to take a moment right now just to talk a little bit about how people are actually doing things in their as they're outside of this. But I do want to also take a moment to talk about. Let's do that first. So I know that a lot of people in this room are also actively working with organizations. Either they have started some, or they have some that they do as a part of their activism, as part of their mission. And I would love to kind of maybe check in some people about how they're doing that. I think right now. Let me check in. I know that Drew is not here, Shay, but if you want to tell me a little bit, I know that the Albina Vision Trust is 4 episodes or 3 episodes total that they're doing on this.
Yes, Albina Vision Trust. Yes, they have. And Drew is actively working. This was just the first episode in the series. So there are other series, there are other episodes that will be coming that will discuss the financial impact, the psychological impact. They're handling different styles too as well. So that's something that's also that definitely that you will see in the future. And I think that it's really key, because again, it's coming I think almost all of the directors are Black, and that they are telling these stories. And I think most of them live in Portland too. I don't know, don't quote me on that, but I think that they are. So they're coming from people who actively live in this area, understand the community. And yeah, it's a great project. So I can't wait for you guys to see it. I'm hopeful that next year we'll be here. We'll be here again. I'm hopeful for that.
Excellent. Jasmine. Thank you. Jasmine, I would love to hear a little bit more about what you're working on and the next things you're doing here. And I know that you're working on, I believe both of you and Jessica are working on screenplays right now. I want to know what stories you want to put out into the world right now. What are you working on?
Yes, I am. My power is writing. I'm kind of an introvert. And while I am impacted by everything that's going on Earth, I'm not the best tweeter, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not the best at social media. What I can do is I can write. I can put it all into stories. And so that's what I've been doing. I was lucky enough to be able to keep writing throughout the pandemic. I know a lot of people had trouble, but I didn't. I was able to keep going. And I found that I've been finding new ways to put Adeline in different places. So she's done the boarding school thing. And so I've been moving her up like through high school. And now I'm writing a story, an animated story with her, trying to be a dancer. And then I finished a pilot where she's much older. She's in her 20s. And this version of Adeline is struggling a bit with mental health. So I'm kind of just using my writing right now to get through the days.
Jessica?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to read some of what Adeline's been up to, Jasmine. me and Jasmine have been a little disconnected through this. I definitely got sucked into a bubble. I did a short with Disney. And so I definitely am on the infiltrating path. I'm like fully trying to infiltrate the studio world and figure out how to like do what Larry said, look left and right and be like, all right, cool, we're all going together. Yeah. And I'm working on trying to do my first screenplay, which is literally like what you said, Shay. I love what you said about, okay, great, we can tell stories of our trauma too, but like, how do we tell them with a full breadth of what you're saying? And it's about my family's relationship with the projects in the 40s. And between the conversations between the Black and brown communities, which have so much hate between them, and I've never understood it in my entire life. And so trying to actually get anybody to take a look at that.
We should talk, because that's something I want to talk about too. We should talk.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're heading toward near the end of our time, but I wanted just to take a moment to kind of talk a little bit about some of the work people are doing that's off screen. I'm amazed. I intentionally didn't bring it up at the beginning, but I'm amazed that somehow it has never come up, Adam, about your day job. And sort of a topic that we might mention in terms of.
Yes. Well, I have I guess two really, but I'm also a programmer. I'm one of the shorts programmers for Sundance, and also at Sundance too. I'm also the associate director of the Indigenous program there, and then also cousin as well too, which also takes up a good chunk of time. So I have about 3 different hats. I'm always wary about which one I'm wearing during which Q&A, because I did another Q&A with SIFF, and I think that was more on my Sundance hat. So I'm always kind of switching it in and out. But yeah, it's working with Indigenous filmmakers, helping them tell their stories, which I also do in cousin as well. So and also making my own films as well. So I think that's kind of it's a bit sort of what I eat, breathe, and sleep is Indigenous film and Indigenous artists. So yeah.
I wanted to try and focus less on that part of your Sundance part of it and more on you as a filmmaker, because I thought that often gets overshadowed sometimes in conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm working on producing a doc that's actually going to be through ESPN. That's coming up. I can't really share too many details about it, but and then also working on a narrative feature as well too, which has kind of been a long gestating thing, but yeah, there's been some interest recently around it. So I'm hoping within the next year to kind of get the story to a point where hopefully I can go out and shoot it for super cheap, and we'll go from there. So.
And Larry, I know that you had some things running. You just had both a feature and the gaze going right now.
Yeah, I'm always telling the story, child. I'm always telling story. I mean, I'm writing 2 mean stories today. I would get my hair cut. She started talking. I wrote a whole pilot in my head and talked to her about it. So I actually want to yield my time because Satya's journey is I love it so much. I met Satya as an actor in a reading of a Terrence McNally play, which was one of the last plays that Terrence McNally saw of his own work before he transitioned during the pandemic. And so, but then Satya had all this directing stuff. Satya, please speak.
Well, I mean, I just, this has been such a fascinating conversation. Thanks, everyone. One of the things I was thinking, in terms of your question about future work, and also kind of what are we doing now? I think for me, and this piece and the president, so many of everybody's pieces here, and in this discussion is kind of questioning the stories that we understand as the stories, and somebody who lives in LA, and I direct quite a lot of television and, pitching shows and things like that, the kind of energy towards a established narrative, towards a normative narrative, a narrative that has been defined and codified by people who have different point of views to us, by the white gaze, the straight gaze, I feel is something that I constantly re-examining in myself. Like, oh, why do I think that this happens next? Do I think this happens next because this really happens next, or this is how I feel this happens next? Or have I just seen enough things, which I'm not in, which nobody like me is represented in which that's what the main guy did, or that's what happened. And so thus I've internalized those narratives and internalized those stories and feel like, you know, so I'm working on a range of different things. Theater, I'm working on a piece of performance actually in Europe right now. It's kind of a more experimental piece of performance. And then like also directing TV, and so a wide range of different things. I think that my kind of focus is always in kind of like questioning the form, questioning the shape that we are being told we are going to have to create in, and making space for us to sort of imagine and create our own stories. And so practically, I think it's also what I really am trying to do is make just forefront opportunities every chance I get, you know, whether it's casting, whether it's hiring practices, just really push up against it, because everybody's talking about wanting to make diversity happen. But when it takes one day extra, they don't actually care. So frequently, when it takes 2 more hours, when you're saying we need more time, we need actually to do a whole nother casting session, because like we haven't found that person. We said that this was going to be a diverse role. We're committed to this character. We haven't found that person. It's going to cost a little more money. It's going to take a little more time. And we need to make that happen. I think fighting for that, when you're in it, it's kind of like a, you know, when you're operating within a commercial industry is really challenging, but really important. And I also have a theater company in Los Angeles called Public Assembly, which is a community theater company. And we're going to be starting up again, hopefully soon. It's been kind of dark during the pandemic. We made some radio work, but that really works with the community at large and is constantly bringing in new people. So, you know, please check out Public Assembly.
It's so good.
I want to like just to pay, because we made this with corporate backing, which I think it's important to talk about our failures too. One of the biggest failures for me is that I think we didn't get to fully fulfill Jasmine's vision because of parameters with casting and how far the reach was able to go. And like the dedicated time that her original script needed for casting with a corporate backing, and like what boxes they were trying to check and how wrong those boxes were. And like being the first time of pushing up against that, like that's something that I feel like everybody should get the opportunity that like wants to direct to bump up against, because it is harder than anybody could imagine, because people will like, they are fighting for things that they just like, it's this weird corporate brain. And like, we all then receive the messages that have gone through this weird corporate brain that have like only to do with bottom lines. And like, I just really think that it's harder than it seems. What Satya is saying is like so much harder than it seems. And we're fighting this mammoth to like actually get things that like these huge corporations have these massive audiences built in, and we deserve to like have that as a platform. And like, that is one thing that like, I will even like openly in this forum apologize to Jasmine for, because it's such a learning process. And so the more that we can know that that's what you're fighting against, I think it's just the more that you can, you know, figure out how to be like, okay, great. How do I push this? How do I get them to give those extra resources? How can I be prepared?
And it's a long journey. And the challenge I feel is also that we're constantly being, you know, like there's energy into getting the respect that we need as creators of color, as female creators, as queer creators. There is getting that ear, getting that listen, getting that you say this is what needs to happen and I'm gonna make sure that that happens is still a process. And I think that, so it's like a very admirable and challenging thing. And I feel you. I mean, it can be really tricky, but I love that you said that and that you appreciated that. And you also made a beautiful film.
I think I might mention at this point that there was a second quote that was part of my inspiration for doing this, which was, we were in the, as everyone in this panel has been, in the backstage part of a presentation, and with a producer who I've met a few times and who I greatly like, and they were just talking about what they were working on, and they kind of sighed and just made the statement that every film was a startup. And I mean, she was coming at it more from a strictly business and legal sense, but it was very true in that sense, and that stuck with me. And part of the idea for this conversation began as came from my thinking about the filmmakers I thought were working to navigate that transition from being a continual startup to instead kind of build more of a community, a cohort, a collective, or some kind of hybrid of that. And if there was anything I wanted out of this conversation, was to feel that maybe that might be a thing that would begin here. And we're just about out of time, so I wanted to make sure to tell you that, and also to encourage you in whatever capacities you have, in whatever ways you want. I love the work you've made. I look forward to seeing more from you. I hope you will let me know when it happens. And I want to make sure that whether it's these people in this Zoom today or whatever, you keep building those communities, because I think part of the challenge you have in the situation like Jessica's is there's no other community to turn to in that moment, right? So maybe that's the thing we all think about. I don't have an answer. I just have questions, and that's why I wanted you to come here and talk with me.
Thank you so much, Stan. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate all of you taking
Thank
the
you
time.
very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a very humbling and like beautiful panel. Thank you guys.
Thank you all so much. I wish you the best of weekends and the best of, and a far better year than the year that we just left.
I love you, Stan.
That was very sweet.
Everybody like that's the
All right, we can cut off now. I think that's the cut off now.